What's growing on, gardeners? It's Sunday, June 25th, and we are cooking here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, but this heat is not going to slow us down because today I'm going to harvest the potatoes that we planted in the spring. And on today's video, I'm going to show you how to harvest, cure, and store these potatoes for months and why you absolutely must be growing this pantry staple in your garden.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and spread shop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Potatoes are one of those great mysteries to me because almost all of us eat them, yet so few of us grow them in our garden. And that makes no sense to me because they are one of the easiest things to grow. They are way easier to grow than most of the most common plants we grow in our annual vegetable gardens. In fact, after I planted my potatoes in the spring, I don't think I've spent a collective hour in total maintaining them after the initial planting. Potato plants actually love cool weather, and because of this, they are one of the very first annual plants that we plant in early spring. And we generally need to harvest them in late spring or early summer before the bad heat sets in. But because they are so versatile and love the cool weather, we can actually plant a second round of potatoes in the midsummer in most climates for a fall harvest as well. Now, if you're looking to harvest hundreds of pounds of potatoes, you're probably going to want to plant the potatoes in ground because you need lots of room in order for that many potatoes to grow and produce. However, I think growing them in ground is actually a lot of work in a backyard setting, and the reason why is because they are a nightshade, so they're in the same family as the tomatoes, the peppers, and the eggplants, and they share a lot of the same diseases, and some of those diseases are often transmissible to cucurbits like cucumbers and squashes as well. They're also a lot more work to harvest in ground because they're usually 6 to 12 inches deep or deeper, and a lot of people, they harvest them with pitchforks, which can damage the potatoes if you accidentally stick them. So they're quite a bit of work to harvest them like that. If you're only looking to grow smaller amounts of potatoes like I am in a backyard setting, I think it is way easier to grow them in large containers, and it makes the harvest so much easier. Earlier in the year, I showed you how to plant potatoes in large fabric grow bags like you see right here. So if you want to learn how to grow potatoes in containers, I will link to that complete guide above and also down in the video description for your convenience, because it will show you exactly how to do it, and you can start another crop just like this for fall gardening pretty soon as well. Most varieties of potatoes grow kind of like a determinate tomato. They will grow to a predetermined height, and then when they start dying back, they are ready for harvest. Now, these have died back beyond where they're supposed to, but we've had over a week straight of torrential rain, and I just wasn't able to harvest them just yet. You need to wait for them to have dry weather to harvest. Now, initially, I planted my potatoes over there in my general growing area, but like I said, these are nightshades, and they share a lot of the same diseases with other nightshades like my tomatoes and cucurbits like my cucumbers. And once they started the dieback process, they tend to get inundated with disease. So the nice thing about the container gardening aspect was, once I started to see them contract diseases, I just dragged them over here to isolate them so they wouldn't spread these diseases to my other susceptible plants. Now that they have died back and they are more than ready for harvest, I'm going to show you how to do that. Once potatoes begin to take root, they really like to have nice, even, consistent moisture. And like I said, they also prefer to have cool growing conditions overall. So it's very important that anytime you grow potatoes, you mulch them very well. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the mulch from the tops of our containers. As I mentioned, growing potatoes is one of the easiest things that we can grow in our annual vegetable gardens. They are almost no maintenance. In fact, after the initial planting, fertilizing, and mulching of my potatoes, the only things I've done to maintain the potatoes is this. Every 2 weeks, I've gone over to the potatoes and I've sprinkled a small handful of organic bone meal on top of them, and then I've taken a watering can and mixed some water-soluble Jack's 20-20-20 fertilizer and split the watering can between the two grow bags. That is it. We're talking a total of 5 minutes worth of work in fertilizing twice a month. And then, of course, I just have to make sure that using my drip irrigation, the bags never dry out, which is an automated process and is basically zero effort. Now all of the mulch has been removed from these containers, and the first thing that you'll notice is many of the potatoes are sitting on top of the grow bags. Now, because of this reason, it is very important that you mulch things very thickly because the sun turns potatoes green. This is another reason why, not just for moisture control, you need to heavily mulch your potatoes. You need to keep them in darkness so nothing turns green. So we're going to start off by pulling some of the potatoes out of the surface, and I'm going to place them on a tarp. Now that the potatoes easily accessible on the surface have been removed, we are going to begin pulling up the individual plants, which are going to have a lot of potatoes attached, and then we're going to throw the plants off to the side. It's very important that we do not compost these plants because they harbor a tremendous amount of disease. So all we're going to do is we're going to walk over to our potatoes and we are going to start yanking up the plants. And in theory, they should have some potatoes attached to them. All right, we just got done pulling all of the potato plants and rooting around in there to find any of the large obvious potatoes, and I placed them all over there in the sun to dry. Now what we're going to do is we are going to dump the grow bags all over this tarp. That's why I have that tarp down, because I need to fish around in that potting mix to find any additional potatoes that may be in there. And the reason why we want to do this is we want to save that potting mix for replanting other things in it. More on that later. And also because we do not want to simply dump these containers in a corner of our yard, because all of the little potato roots will have these little tiny potato nodes that are left on there, and they will sprout, and wherever you dump them will have potatoes growing for all eternity. I'll prove it to you. The first year I moved here, almost 5 years ago, I dumped one grow bag full of potatoes in there, and they have been growing back multiple times a year ever since. I can't get rid of them. That's why we want to dump these on a tarp, and it also makes harvesting and picking back up the potting mix so much easier. Here is our complete potato harvest from both grow bags. Now look, I know this is not a tremendous amount of potatoes, but this is as close to free food as is possible. All I did was I planted some old potatoes that were conventionally grown. They weren't even organic, that rolled into the back of my pantry over the winter and sprouted. And I stuck them in those grow bags that already had potting mix in them left over from the previous season. So aside from an hour to plant them, an hour's worth of total collective maintenance, and maybe $2 to $3 worth of fertilizer, I have 20 pounds of food that I otherwise wouldn't have. Now, I specifically harvested these potatoes today because we have no rain in the forecast, and I'm going to let them sit out on this tarp in order to dry in the sun. And then once they dry out, I will show you how we are going to cure them for long-term storage. Then we are going to reuse this potting mix. So when it comes down to reusing the potting mix, we want to plant something in that potting mix that does not share any of the same diseases with potatoes. So we don't want to grow any nightshades or cucurbits inside that potting mix. A few great ideas are brassicas like broccoli, cauliflower, and kale. You could grow things like root vegetables like beets and carrots, or another great option are sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are actually part of the morning glory family and not related to your standard potatoes. So it's perfectly safe to put sweet potato slips in those grow bags after you harvest the potatoes from them. But what I'm going to grow in those grow bags is lettuce. Now, it's way too hot to grow lettuce here out in my garden, but I am going to grow them in 100% shade. That's the benefit of growing in grow bags. So I'm going to drag those over to a corner of my house that never gets any sun, and I'm going to plant a bolt-resistant, heat-tolerant romaine variety in there in complete shade, and that will prevent it from bolting and getting bitter. So I will actually be able to harvest fresh lettuce in my garden in coastal North Carolina in the middle of the summer. So these are ways that you can maximize your harvest and reuse that potting mix. Now that the potatoes have dried off in the sun, I moved them into my garage on the concrete floor with a piece of cardboard down to begin the curing process. And the purpose of the curing process is to allow the skins on the potatoes to heal over any nicks, cuts, or dings that may have happened during the harvesting process, because if there are any blemishes on the skin of the potato that don't seal over, they will not store for very long. So it's very important that any potatoes that do not heal over completely during this curing process get eaten immediately, because they will not store if they still have nicks, cuts, and bruises on them. Now, one thing you will notice is that I did not remove any of the dirt from the potatoes, because removing the dirt at this stage will continue to scrape and bruise lose the very fragile skins. So we're going to leave the dirt on. It's not going to hurt anything. And I placed these in rows where none of the potatoes touch each other. That way they get perfect airflow. Now these potatoes have been placed 4 feet from the opening of my garage door. That way they get plenty of airflow throughout the day when my garage door is open, but they will never be in sunlight and they will never get wet, because sunlight will cause sprouting on the potatoes and then they will be ruined. You want to keep them in shade for this process. This process will take about 7 to 10 days for the skins to heal over. After 7 to 10 days, once they are healed over, you can then store them for long term and they will keep for months. Now, if you're curing them in a garage like I am, it's very important that during this curing process, you open your garage door throughout the day to let that fresh air flow in. You don't want to leave your garage door closed all the time. That fresh air circulation is important. It is okay to close your garage door during the evening, which you need to do for safety reasons, obviously, but during the day, you at least want to leave it open to give the potatoes airflow and air circulation to assist in the curing process. Then, once the potatoes are cured, you can then store them for long-term use. Now, the ideal storage location is going to be in a basement, because that will maintain a temperature of about 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity. That is the ideal conditions. Bringing them indoors where it's air conditioned is actually a really low humidity environment, and they will dry out and shrivel up in a short period of time. So maintaining moisture and humidity is actually important for long-term storage. So that 60 to 65 degree Fahrenheit humid underground basement where there is no light is what is going to keep them in storage for the longest period of time. Now, here in the coastal Carolinas, we do not have basements because of the high water table, and I can't bring them inside because it is too dry in there with the AC running. So the closest thing I'm going to be able to do is move them to the back of my garage and hang them up, so it's at least a higher humidity environment that completely keeps them out of any sunlight, because sunlight will cause them to sprout and then they won't store for very long. So what you see right here, I actually have some shallots left over from last year that are just hanging in my garage in the higher humidity environment, and they can keep for a very long period of time. So once they cure, I'm simply going to put the potatoes in these organza bags with drawstrings, and then I'm going to hang them in the back of my garage off of the hooks, because it's better to be in a warm and humid environment than a dry environment. And if you have a basement or a root cellar, that's obviously the best place to keep them. So keep that in mind. If you are interested in these organza bags, you're looking for something like these are super cheap. I'll make sure to drop a direct link in the video description for them. I use these for all kinds of things, for protecting fruits like tomatoes and figs, and for storing onions and potatoes and garlic. They work great. And that right there is how you can grow, harvest, cure, and store potatoes long-term in your backyard garden. Potatoes are one of the absolute easiest things for you to grow at home, and because they have such a long storage life, they are one of the ultimate crops for long-term food security, and I can't figure out why more people don't grow them, because it's so easy, especially what you get back in return for a very, very small investment in time and money. Now, like I said, potatoes also make an excellent fall crop, so depending on the variety you grow, they usually take anywhere from about 90 to 120 days to maturity. So if you still want to grow potatoes for the fall, consider going out and purchasing some organic potatoes now and put them in your pantry to begin the sprouting process, because once they start to develop eyes, they are ready for planting, and you can use the complete guide for planting potatoes down in the video description that will teach you how to do that. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So expand that video description to see everything I use in real life in my Amazon storefront. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Well, it's every dog's least favorite weekend, Independence Day weekend, and Dale must have heard somebody setting a firework off miles away, and he's been shaking and quivering, and I found him in the closet hiding, and I was finally able to get him out of the closet. He's all drippy and droopy and worried, but that's okay. Maybe a little treat will cheer you up. Oh, good. At least he's taking treats now, because sometimes Dale gets so upset he won't even take a treat. So we just want to give a little shout out to all the pups out there that are as scared of the big bad old fireworks this weekend. We're with you, staying safe from the sky booms.